Welcome, come in. Welcome back to the Associateds Around the Table. I'm your host, Beth Goldsmith. Across our communities, on social media, and on our college campuses, we're witnessing an alarming rise in anti-Semitism unlike anything we've seen for decades. Today, I am joined by second and third generation Holocaust survivors, Berle Herskovitz, Richard Grilly, and Elana Katzenberg. With their unique perspectives, we talk to them about anti-Semitism today and what we need to do. Let's get started. I'm going to ask each of you to begin by sharing just a little bit about your family's history and when you first learned of it. Elana, would you begin?
My grandparents are both survivors, both from a small town in Czechoslovakia called Velikoluchki, outside of Munkac. And they were childhood sweethearts, actually. Growing up, they lived down the street from one another. My grandfather, Ernest, he always had a crush on my grandmother. They had like an idyllic life growing up until the 30s when they were about 17, and he went his way and he got shipped off to the Hungarian army, and she stayed home, and both of them were in various camps. My grandmother was in Auschwitz, she was in Bergen-Belsen, and my grandfather was in several work camps, as well as participated in a death march. They miraculously both survived. Both sides of my family had family in America, and that's where they restarted their life.
And how old were you when you learned of all this?
So that's such an interesting question, because I don't remember a time when I didn't know. It was just really a part of who we were.
Berle, will you go on with yours?
A lot of similarities. I always knew that my parents were survivors because my mother had horrific nightmares, because there was a lot of crying going on. My mother would never really speak about it. My father did, always with a smile on his face, because he was the sole survivor of 10. They were both from the Ukraine/Poland. It was Poland at the time. And they came to the town where my mother lived, and my mother they had taken her to a collective farm. And that night when they came to the farm, her and her friends slept on top of a haystack. And in the middle of the night, they heard screams, and they didn't move for 3 days. And when they came down, everybody was gone. My father, they knew the Nazis were coming. It was close. And he went to his parents. His friend came to him and said, "Let's run." And my father said, "How can I run? How can I leave my family?" His parents came outside and talked to him, and they said, "We can't tell you what to do." He decided to leave. His parents went inside. He never said goodbye to them because he couldn't. And his little brother ran after him and said, "Take me with you." And my father said, "I can't, because I might be going to my death." He took off his shoes, he gave them to his little brother, and he ran to Russia. I always knew I was different. My mother didn't call outside and say, "Berle," it was Berle,
Right.
Come home.
Yeah.
My mother always felt like a foreigner, like she was different.
All right, Richard, tell us your story.
Okay. My mother was born in 1928 in a small village in Czechoslovakia. Her mother was able to get her on a list on the Czech Kinder Transport. 669 children, and my mother was one of them. We had a big family on my mother's side in Czechoslovakia. Her mother, sisters, cousins, they all ended up in a concentration camp called Terezin, and from there they went to Auschwitz. And then my mother came to America in 1947. She had an aunt here. My father was born in Turkey, but they lived in Vienna until 1936. My grandfather had obtained false papers from Persia, and nobody in 1940 was coming to America from Persia, so the quota was small, but you could come in. And my father, grandparents, the whole family left Bordeaux the day France surrendered, and went to England, and then eventually came to America.
Let me try and bring it to what's going on today. Do you think your histories, what you know of what anti-Semitism was then, gives you a unique perspective on anti-Semitism as it is today?
All my life, I always believed there would be another Holocaust. My father was a Melamed, a Judaic scholar, and he always said that according to our history, whenever assimilation has reached 75%, 50%, that we've had a Holocaust, and we're at 75%.
I could never envision that the U.S. would have the kind of anti-Semitism it has today. The college administrators and the professors, a lot of them are anti-Semitic, and they were saying in Germany it was the same way. It wasn't the uneducated, it was almost the highly educated who supported Hitler.
Yeah. I think October 7th really opened my eyes a lot, where I would notice as growing up and these like kind of tiny little jabs that I'd receive. It was offensive, but it didn't seem violent. I wasn't in fear of my life. And as an adult now and witnessing what has been happening, it's for the first time that I've really said, okay, this is dangerous now.
So we just started to touch on a couple other questions I want to throw out. And one is drawing some parallels between anti-Semitism then and anti-Semitism now. I think that was such an interesting thing when you spoke of, Richard, of it being the intelligentsia who really were part of this.
There's this quote I heard a few months ago from Mark Twain that it's history doesn't repeat itself, but it has a tendency to rhyme. So like you said, the intelligentsia, I think previous to October 7th, things were already happening within the universities that were aggressive towards Jewish people. But it seems like the volume has been turned up so much. I think, historically, or when I was growing up, what we could always attribute it to was a lack of knowledge, like, the Ku Klux Klan, like these are just like people that are uneducated. And it's so much scarier when you're like looking at these people that have the means to really delve into the history of what our story is and completely ignore it.
Do you think that people have forgotten about the Holocaust? Do you think it has lost its place in discussion?
I think that even our children, my children, for example, they know it was there, but they've all become, it's become sort of like embedded in them, and they always think there's like a new start. And I don't think they know it's there, but it's like distant. It's like the Egyptians,
There is a disconnect, and I think when you start to reduce the humanity of people and you no longer think of them as human, you no longer connect with the story or think or have empathy, that's when you lose interest. And what's happening now is everyone's being othered. Whether you're othering the Palestinians or you're othering the Israelis, you're basically you're bucketing people into these groups, and you're no longer looking at them as humans that can experience the very same thing that you can. My grandparents came and spoke to my junior high and told their story. And that was incredibly profound for kids my age. Like, it was never questioned if the Holocaust happened or the magnitude of it. But now, most of the Holocaust survivors have passed away. So it's our job as descendants to keep those stories alive and maintain that empathy and maintain the humanization component of it, because that, to me, is what is really going to make a difference.
The Speakers Bureau is part of the Baltimore Jewish Council, which is part of us. And tell us some of the places where you've spoken, like what groups have you spoken to, and tell us a little about that experience.
I spoke at the John Carroll School. And I have to tell you, the reception was amazing. The principal of the school told me, the reason we do this is because we want our children to go to college and be prepared.
I think for me, what really ignited the flame to push my grandparents' stories was just feeling like being this social media armchair activist was just futile and fake, to be completely honest. I wanted to contribute and make a difference in the unique way that we can as descendants of Holocaust survivors. And my grandmother was no different than them, like that she was just a kid, just like them. And got everything taken away from her just because she was Jewish. That was it.
How do you think the Jewish community should be responding? What can we do?
I think we need to do a better job of our willingness to sit across the table with someone who doesn't agree with us.
Martin Luther King said, "It's not the words of our enemies that we will remember, it's the silence of our friends." I think the Jewish community has done a lot, but it's the non-Jewish community that needs to step up now.
Sorry if it brought up painful memories. I hope that it will be meaningful to everyone watching it and that they will be able to relate to it as well. Because as we said earlier about history repeating itself or even rhyming, we are doomed to repeat that if we don't do something and if we don't understand it. And I commend you so much for going out into the community and continuing to do that, because clearly that's an important piece of making sure that never again really can be true. Thank you.
Thank you.
If you would like a speaker for your school or business, go to BaltJC, that's BALTJC.org. And we hope you'll join us for the Associated's next edition of Around the Table as we continue to explore what our community is thinking about today's issues.